Salams and welcome to another episode of Daily Debrief coming to you from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhant Ani, and on the show today, People's Dispatch's A-team, Anna, Abdul and Anish join us to talk about Israeli raids on Palestinian rights organizations, healthcare workers in Brazil and their support for the presidential candidature of Lula, and finally, in the US, a significant verdict against Starbucks. First up, Israeli occupation forces early in the morning on the 18th of August ransacked and shut down the offices of 6 leading Palestinian civil rights and human rights organizations in the occupied West Bank. The early morning raids targeted Al-Haq, the prisoner advocacy group Adamir, the Bisan Center for Human Rights, Defense for Children International Palestine, DCIP, the Union of Agricultural Work Committees, and the Union of Palestinian Women's Committees. This is not the first time such raids have taken place. The 6 organizations have been under constant pressure, in fact, since Israel designated them terrorist organizations in 2021. I spoke to Abdul for more details on this earlier via video conference. Right, so Abdul, what exactly were the sort of circumstances or the reasoning given by Israeli forces or the Israeli side for conducting these raids early in the morning or late at night, however you want to look at it?
Well, Israel had banned issuing a notice last year, all these six organizations claiming that they are all affiliated to Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is, according to the Israeli law, is a banned organization, is a quote-unquote terrorist organization, which is primarily a Marxist left-leaning Palestinian liberation movement. Though Israel has not provided any evidence, and despite the fact that most of these organizations have filed review petitions in courts or appeals to the Israeli administration, Israeli military. By the way, this was a military order. So Israel basically uses this particular excuse that these are quote-unquote terrorist organizations which are front for recruiting the militants for the Palestinian quote-unquote terrorist groups and so on. So that is the reason Israel is giving. But when it for last 1 year, when it was the ban order was issued, there has been no evidence in the public domain provided to prove these allegations. First of all, this is a purely ideological assault on the Palestinian liberation movements. These, by the way, these are not also political groups who are directly working for the liberation of Palestine. These are the groups who are working in certain sections, interest sections, for example, Women, Palestinian Agricultural Organization, Al-Haq, then the Adamir, which primarily works for human rights and the prisoners, and then there are also research institutes. So these groups are not in any way like Hamas or Jihad or other, a kind of a militant resistant movement. These are the groups which primarily civil society groups working among the Palestinians to kind of address some of their human rights issues, some of their other concerns, day-to-day concerns. So since their work has kind of affected quote-unquote Israel's image throughout the world, what they claim, and that basically they do not, the Israeli ruling classes do not like it. And therefore, this assault is primarily a political move against the Palestinian groups.
What wider impact will these raids have, Abdul? Like you mentioned, there are the varied organizations operating across various sections of Palestinian society, looking at important issues, whether it's children's issues, women's issues, agricultural issues, and of course, human rights violations. So what is the wider context in which all this is going on, and kind of the reaction as well as impact that these raids will have?
Well, of course, this is one of the ways through which you basically scuttle the Palestinian movement. Since these groups are working to those among those who are affected by occupation in one way or another, trying to address their concerns, both locally in the occupied territories as well as internationally, highlighting the problems, highlighting the human rights violations done by the Israeli occupation. If this repression continues, Of course, this is going to affect a large section of the civil society groups in Palestine as well. All Palestinian groups, whether they are working for human rights or they are fighting elections or they are leading an armed resistance to Palestine, to Israeli occupation, all of them are in the same category, because for Israel, they are creating a kind of questioning the whole attempt to claim legitimacy.
Right.
Among, particularly in the eyes of the international community. And the work of these organizations questions that legitimacy. It exposes day-to-day oppression which occupation does in the occupied territories or within Israel itself, to Palestinians, to minorities, Palestinian minorities. So if this operation is successful, of course, it will affect the Palestinians and it will hamper the Palestinian human rights movement in particular. But I think it will also expose the apartheid system, apartheid structure, which is created by Israel and practiced on daily basis inside Palestine. That there is one rule for the groups which are basically talking about Zionist interests, and there is another rule for the Palestinians who are basically looking for the violations of human rights. So this kind of dual discriminatory policies will be further exposed with this particular raid. So of course, this is a double. This should be seen in this particular context. That on the one hand, it exposes the Israeli apartheid, makes it more obvious for the world to see, apparent for the world to see, and but on the other side, it is also basically around the functioning of the Palestinian organizations, which provide a small relief to the people who are affected from oppressive policies and acts conducted by the occupation.
Right. Thanks, Abdul, for that important update. We've been consistently covering the election campaign in Brazil over the past few weeks and months, and today we look at how health workers see the upcoming polls. On the 5th of August, hundreds of activists participated in the Free, Democratic and Popular Health Conference organized by the Frente Pela Vida, or the Front for Life, in São Paulo. At this meeting, health workers, managers, social and political leaders, researchers and public health experts from various parts of the country discussed a health agenda for the entire nation of Brazil. The country is currently facing challenges including the lack of funding for the Unified Health System, the SUS, and accumulated problems because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The event was, of course, attended also by former president and current presidential candidate Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. In his speech, Lula reaffirmed that he intends to revoke the spending cap in the federal budget, which has been in force in Brazil since 2016. Anna Vrachar of the People's Health Movement joins us now for all the details on this story. Anna, good to see you back on Daily Debrief, and today we are discussing a story at least that in some senses looks forward with a hopeful kind of perspective. In that context, what were some of the demands and recommendations that were made at this event that is looking to set an agenda for healthcare for a country as massive as Brazil?
Well, essentially, the initiative Front for Life held a health-oriented conference at the beginning of August, and it brought together health workers and social workers, public experts and health activists who talked about how the health system in Brazil should look like ahead. And unsurprisingly, it had a lot in common with what the health program of the Lula presidency campaign looks like. So essentially what the main point is, of course, is reverting the years of budget cuts and of austerity that the public health system in Brazil has been exposed to strengthen the public health system. And also when we talk about COVID-19, is also to strengthen the vaccination campaign and to look what can be done when it comes to immunization programs. So what this boils down is that so Front for Life is an initiative that was formed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And Front for Life is now continuing to advocate for a better health system, starting with more investment in the health budget, So they are calling for at least a 6% investment of the GDP into health and into better allocation of resources so that primary healthcare services can be strengthened. So why this, why the conference is so important has been highlighted by many activists who were there, and that's because it's a common point that they found together. It's a point of convergence, and it's something that they say has been difficult to find since Brazil's constitution was drafted in the late 80s, and so they see this as a very important point for the health movement overall, because it has this kind of strength and it has this kind of understanding that that health is something that the different groups in society share, and that can only function if it's built on basis of solidarity and of common goods. And so, this is something also that Lula has been highlighting in the campaign when he talks about health for the past couple of weeks and months. And he was also there at the conference. And of course, he spoke about some of the issues that the activists said that were pressing issues as well. So we can talk about this a bit more further on.
Taking off a bit there, Anna, from what you were saying, great to have that point of convergence now from which to, I guess, build a path forward. Just looking back at, it's a highly sensitive topic and therefore an important topic so close to elections. Could you sort of summarize for us in what way, you were mentioning the spending cap, the current regime, the Bolsonaro government, has looked at its policies towards healthcare?
Well, maybe we can take the pandemic as a starting point, and of course that's because Brazil had such bad record in the pandemic, and it was an approach which was basically not relying on all the public health, on the good and sound public health advice that was around. And President Bolsonaro chose to pursue a completely different path and put into danger a lot of people's lives and health. And this is particularly worrisome because, so Brazil's public health system, the unified health system, as it's called, is one of the few universal health systems in the global south. And it's so amazing because of that. It's also amazing because it's not public only when it comes to the delivery, but it also encompasses a lot of other aspects of health. So there's research and development and the education of the health workforce. So it's really something that should be nurtured and invested in and strengthened in order to make the best health for all Brazilians possible. But on the other hand, you have the approach of the Bolsonaro administration, which basically said the complete opposite. And they said that they would, and they did so in practice. So they limited investment in the public health system while continuing to support the private system at the same time. This was particularly true during the pandemic. So if you look at the kind of support that the private sector got during the Bolsonaro administration, it was in billions of reais during the pandemic. So basically, while the public health system was underfunded and the ministers from this administration were talking about how it made no sense to have a publicly owned and publicly operated system, the private sector was reaping benefits. And so, of course, the cap that we mentioned before was introduced in 2016, so a bit before the 2018 election of Bolsonaro. But what's important about it is that it's one of the harshest austerity measures that was introduced in the world overall. And People's Dispatch has already reported on that when in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. And so because of this cap and because the ministers expressed such open support of similar measures, the public health system was weakened, and it's not in the best shape to fulfill its role. Yeah. This is something that's unlikely to change if Bolsonaro was to continue, in his post as president. While on the other hand, we did hear from the Lula campaign that plans were completely different, so that more investment in healthcare can be expected, that the input of health workers and of health activists will be valued when we're talking about health policy and health plans. So it would make an enormous difference to the millions of Brazilians who are relying on the unified health system when they seek healthcare.
Fair enough, Anna. Thanks very much. On that hopeful note, I think we'll wrap it up for the show for today. Thanks again, as always, for taking out the time to join us on Daily Debrief. And finally, a federal district judge in the US city of Memphis has ruled that 7 workers fired by global coffee retail giant Starbucks be reinstated in line with the findings of an investigation conducted in May by the National Labor Relations Bureau. The bureau concluded that the judge concluded that they were fired in retaliation for their roles in union organizing activities. Cheryl Lipman, the judge in question, ruled that the Labor Board, which is the US government's watchdog body, provided enough evidence that the findings were based on the firings, were based on anti-union feelings. Anish joined me earlier via video conference for all the details on this developing story. Anish, good to see you. An important ruling coming from the US federal judge in Memphis. What are the details of this specific case?
Yeah, so these workers were fired because they had an interview, an in-store interview in the store that they were working in, and Starbucks decided that this violated their official guidelines and workplace policies. They called it. They claimed that such an action, which was the interview especially, was basically how they were organizing in the store for a union vote, which eventually became successful, despite them being fired. But on the other hand, so this thing they claimed made the workplace unsafe, and it actually put the store and the customers and everybody in an unsafe situation. So this was a claim that they made. They obviously used their guidelines, official guidelines, and in some cases before, and it's not just limited to Starbucks, but many of the NLRB raised cases of workers being terminated for union activities. Usually, courts have taken, if not in all cases, but in many of the cases, they've taken the stand where they go by the official guidelines and decide that this was violated, so it is valid for the company to terminate their employment.
Justified is essentially termination.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
But in this case, the workers were able to prove the fact that the company very arbitrarily implemented, and duties became stronger, and it started getting attention. Now, and that shows that the company was tolerating certain, if not violations, but flexible use of some of these guidelines and policies by workers to usually help each other around. But that tolerance certainly just stopped happening after the interview happened, after the unionization drive became quite widespread, and it started becoming quite well known and started getting coverage and attention from the media. And so obviously it was a union busting drive, a union busting action on the part of Starbucks. So the judgment is significant in that respect, that the judge actually took this factor into account, which is difficult to prove, obviously, but is something that is significant and can actually help in certain other cases. Obviously, U.S. court system do not run on precedent in many cases, but this definitely can impact how cases will be fought in cases of such unjustified termination.
Right, and we have seen, Anish, over the past, like you said, as the media coverage around these activities have increased, we've seen a large number of cases, appeals with the the Labor Bureau, and in like you were saying, in most cases, the outcomes are not favorable. It may not set a precedent, but it might at least be a bit of a setback to union busting activities and a fillip to those who are on the other side trying to organize.
Definitely. So we have to remember that more than 220 Starbucks stores have already unionized. In almost all cases, except for certain rarities, almost all cases where there has been an election in a Starbucks store has gone into a pro-union, or either unanimously or overwhelming majority has gone for unionization. And there are dozens of other stores that are still either waiting for the union election to happen or are in the process of it happening. Starbucks is trying all sorts of ways in actually to undermine this whole unionization drive. They're trying to claim that mail-in ballots are now violating is a manipulated process. Kind of reminds us of how conservatives in the United States try to undermine the election in 2020 by calling the mail-in ballots as fake votes and whatsoever. They're trying to claim that the NLRB is trying to side with the workers. I mean, it is the Labor Relations Board after all, but side with pro-unionization groups, that it is trying to help these workers to unionize. Like, those are the claims that they're trying to make. Essentially, they're trying to argue that the NLRB is not neutral party in this case, but that they can't really prove any of that. They're trying to claim that one unnamed NLRB official has found that there is some kind of backdoor deal between the NLRB and some of these pro-union organizers. But again, none of that is being, none of that is being clearly substantiated by Starbucks on their part. So they're trying to do away with mail-in ballot, and they are insisting an in-person ballot in any kind of unionization drive that happens in any of its stores. So, and this is definitely something that is significant, considering the fact that Starbucks workers are one of the lowest rung. Like, even though their average pay might be slightly above average across the United States, but they're still one of the lower end of the income groups
Wage
or wage groups in the United States. And they are definitely, many of them are not even considered workers. You have to remember that they give all sorts of designations to avoid them being labeled as employees.
Right.
We also have wages only increasing when last year, when there was a massive labor shortage, and they had difficulty hiring people with with the low wages that they had set, and that is when they actually hiked the offers that they were giving to $17 per hour, and even assuring some $15 per hour minimum wage for their workers, which is something that happened only last year. We have to remember, amidst a massive labor shortage that was that hit service sector in the United States.
In the United States, yeah.
So this labor unionization definitely, as you said, is something that is threatening Starbucks in many ways. And this judgment will definitely is a much needed setback, a much necessary setback to Starbucks and their anti-union activities. And this really is something of a boost, a morale boost at least, to the organizers who are trying to push for further unions in the stores.
Right. Thanks for joining us, Anish. That's all we have for you on this episode of Daily Debrief. For more details on these stories, as always, head over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org. And of course, please do give us a follow on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever social media platform you use for regular updates on the work we do. We'll be back again tomorrow for our week-ending episode of the show. Until then, stay safe. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.